November 1843. The scene is not a bustling laboratory or a grand university hall, but a quiet London drawing room, the air thick with the scent of beeswax and coal smoke from the hearth. Gaslight casts a flickering golden glow on polished mahogany and velvet curtains. It is here, amidst the domestic tranquility expected of a Victorian noblewoman, that a revolution is being silently published. The latest volume of has just been released, a periodical dedicated to translating foreign scientific works for an English audience. Buried within its dense pages is an article by the Italian engineer Luigi Menabrea, describing a fantastical new machine, the Analytical engine, a theoretical contraption of brass cogs and steam-powered pistons conceived by the brilliant, if notoriously cantankerous, mathematician Charles Babbage. The translation is credited simply to AAL, Augusta Ada Lovelace. But this was no mere act of linguistic transcription. Lovelace, the estranged daughter of the infamous poet Lord Byron, had done something unprecedented. Her own annotations, her notes, were nearly 3 times longer than the original text they were meant to clarify. And within those notes, specifically in the section labeled Note G, she had penned the single most important document of the pre-digital age. It was an algorithm. The world's first computer program, a precise step-by-step sequence of operations designed to command a machine that did not yet exist. Her chosen task was the calculation of Bernoulli numbers, a complex and seemingly arcane sequence of rational numbers crucial to number theory and analysis. To the casual reader, it was a dry mathematical exercise. But to understand its significance is to understand the chasm between calculation and computation. Babbage saw his engine as a magnificent automated abacus, a tool to eliminate human error from the production of mathematical tables. He saw its power in arithmetic. Lovelace, however, saw something infinitely more profound. She saw that the engine could manipulate not just numbers, but symbols. She envisioned a device that could operate on any abstract concept, provided its fundamental relations could be expressed in logical notation. Her algorithm for the Bernoulli numbers was the proof of concept. It wasn't just a formula, it was a script. She detailed how the engine would need to store initial values, how it would perform a series of additions and multiplications in a specific order, and most critically, how it could execute a loop, repeating a set of instructions, a foundational concept in modern programming. She diagrammed the flow of data through the machine's theoretical store and mill, the 19th century equivalents of memory and processor. This was not mathematics as it was known. This was a new science of operations. Yet, as this intellectual firebomb landed in the heart of the scientific establishment, the response was a deafening silence, punctuated by polite, condescending dismissal. The men of the Royal Society, who held the keys to scientific legitimacy, saw Babbage as the sole genius, the irascible inventor, and Lovelace as his enthusiastic, if somewhat overly imaginative, patroness and popularizer. Her contributions, particularly the most abstract and visionary ones, were brushed aside. They were deemed too speculative, too philosophical. In a world that was just beginning to professionalize science along rigid, empirical, and distinctly masculine lines, her work was labeled as something other. It was called poetic fancy. The label was a masterstroke of patriarchal dismissal, at once acknowledging her Byronic heritage while simultaneously delegitimizing her scientific rigor. It implied that her insights were not the product of disciplined analytical thought, but of an untamed, feminine, artistic imagination. The very quality that allowed her to see beyond the gears and levers to the universal logic within, her poetic science as she called it, was used as the weapon to bar her from entry into the pantheon of serious thinkers. The world saw a machine that could crunch numbers. She saw the birth of artificial intelligence. The world saw an assistant. She was the architect of a new reality. The system didn't just fail to see her genius, it actively recategorized it as a lesser form of knowing. Whose name was on the grant proposals to the British government for the engine's construction? Babbage's alone. Whose name was whispered in the halls of power? Babbage's. Her initials, AAL, remained a footnote, her algorithm a curiosity. How could such a monumental intellectual leap, the very blueprint for the digital age, be so thoroughly and immediately erased, not by malice, but by the systemic, almost casual blindness of an entire institution? Following that initial dismissal, we uncover an even deeper layer of systemic rejection, one that goes beyond mere oversight and borders on intellectual persecution. To find it, we must leave the public record of and venture into the archives, into the spidery ink of Lovelace's private correspondence. It is here, in letters to her tutor, the mathematician Augustus de Morgan, and in the margins of her own drafts, that the true, terrifying scope of her vision unfolds. Her Note G was not just about one algorithm, it was a manifesto for general-purpose computing. She famously wrote, "The analytical engine weaves algebraic patterns just as the jacquard loom weaves flowers and leaves." This single sentence was a conceptual explosion. The jacquard loom used punched cards to control the weaving of complex textile patterns. Lovelace understood that by replacing the threads with mathematical variables and logical symbols, the engine could be made to weave anything. She explicitly stated that the machine could operate on data far beyond the province of number. She foresaw a future where it could compose elaborate and scientific pieces of music, create graphical art, and manipulate language, essentially anything that could be represented symbolically. This was the blueprint for the modern computer, a universal machine capable of processing information, not just calculating sums. Babbage, for all his mechanical brilliance, was still largely tethered to the idea of a supreme calculator. His own writings reveal a mind focused on the production of flawless logarithmic tables. Lovelace's letters, in stark contrast, are consumed with the "what if a machine could reason? What are the limits of mechanical intelligence?" She even presciently noted its limitations, stating, "The analytical engine has no pretensions whatever to anything. It can do what we to perform." This single sentence prefigures a century of debate on artificial intelligence, establishing the fundamental principle that a computer can only follow the instructions given to it by a human programmer. She was not just writing code, she was defining the philosophical boundaries of the entire field of computer science before it even had a name. To the Victorian scientific mind, this was incomprehensible. It was a leap too far, too fast. In an era where female intellect was medically theorized to be a drain on reproductive health, a source of nervous exhaustion and hysteria, Lovelace's abstract, almost metaphysical thinking was not seen as genius. It was seen as dangerously eccentric. Her ideas were so far outside the established framework of empirical science that they appeared almost mystical. This wasn't just about denying a woman credit. It was about pathologizing a form of female intelligence that the system could not control or categorize. It was a kind of intellectual witchcraft. A witch, after all, is a woman whose power and knowledge operate outside of and in defiance to the established patriarchal order. Lovelace's poetic science was her spell book, her algorithms the incantations for a future her male contemporaries could neither build nor comprehend. They could understand a machine of cogs and steam. They could not understand a machine of pure logic. The systemic bias, therefore, manifested not as a locked door, but as a diagnosis. Her brilliance was reframed as a symptom of her unstable, Byronic temperament, a flight of fancy to be humored but not to be taken as serious, rigorous science. The price of this dismissal was catastrophic. It arguably set back the dawn of the computer age by a full century. Had her notes been recognized as the foundational text they were, the trajectory of the 20th century might have been radically different. But they were not. Her work languished in obscurity, a footnote in the story of Babbage's failed engine. How did these visionary insights, buried under the weight of institutional sexism and misunderstanding, ever manage to claw their way back into the light? That question of resurrection finds its answer not in a grand ceremony, but in the quiet hum of early computing labs, a full century later, as the world teetered on the brink of another war. In the 1940s, a new generation of pioneers was grappling with the very same abstract concepts that had consumed Ada Lovelace. Among them was Alan Turing. As he worked on the theoretical foundations of what would become the Turing machine, a universal computing device, he independently arrived at the same fundamental insight Lovelace had articulated in 1843. That a single machine could be programmed to perform any computable task by manipulating symbols. While direct evidence of Turing studying Lovelace before his seminal work is debated, the conceptual lineage is undeniable. The true rediscovery began in earnest after the war. In 1953, a book titled A Massachusetts, a collection of essays on early computing, republished Lovelace's notes in their entirety. For the first time, the founding generation of computer scientists, people working with the first hulking room-sized electronic brains like the ENIAC, could read her words. And they were stunned. They found, in the elegant prose of a 19th century countess, the very soul of their new machine. This rediscovery culminated in the most significant, and perhaps ironic, tribute to her legacy. In the late 1970s, the United States Department of Defense, a bastion of institutional power, was facing a software crisis. It was running hundreds of different programming languages for its various embedded systems, leading to chaos and inefficiency. They decided to commission a single, powerful, universal language for their most critical operations: jet fighters, missile guidance, air traffic control, nuclear systems. After a rigorous selection process, the winning design was officially named Ada. This act was a profound institutional course correction. The very ideas dismissed as poetic fancy were now enshrined in the language of life and death precision. The work of the woman whose intellect was deemed too mystical and feminine for Victorian science now formed the logical bedrock of the world's most powerful military. The resistance to her legacy had been institutional, and so, fittingly, was her final official recognition as the prophet of the computer age. But this restoration was not easy. For decades, historical accounts continued to minimize her role, painting her as Babbage's secretary or muse. A persistent and now thoroughly debunked myth claimed that Babbage himself wrote the algorithms and she merely annotated them. It took painstaking work by historians like Doron Swade and feminist scholars like Sadie Plant, who meticulously analyzed the drafts and correspondence between Lovelace and Babbage to prove her intellectual authorship and demonstrate that she understood the analytical engine's potential far more deeply than its own inventor. Her contribution wasn't just the first algorithm, it was the entire conceptual framework of symbolic computation that makes our digital world possible. Every time you type a word into a search engine, stream a song, or watch a video, you are engaging in an act of symbolic manipulation that she first envisioned. The Internet, a global network for processing not just numbers, but images, text, and music, is the ultimate realization of her poetic science. The jacquard loom of her analogy is now weaving the very fabric of modern society. Her code, once buried, now runs the world. Her story is a stark reminder. How many other witches of science await their rightful place in the narrative of human progress? Their legacies are not just history. They are the missing blueprints for a future we have yet to build.